Have you ever sat down at your machine and started sewing and noticed that the stitches are not quite as even as they used to be? Or maybe you're halfway through a seam and your needle suddenly breaks. Or even worse, you're sewing along, happily minding your own business, and suddenly your machine starts making weird noises. Yeah, I know, because I've been there too. Today I'm sharing the rookie mistake that's causing these problems and 3 simple tips to fix it. So keep watching. Hi, I'm Tony, and this is So Lounge. Now, the rookie mistake I'm talking about is not paying attention to your needle. Your needle is one of the most important components of your sewing machine. That little 2 inches of steel can make or break any sewing project. Now, when I was learning to sew, I had a whole list of supplies that I was supposed to get before my first day of class, and they had a bunch of needles listed on that paper. So I went to the Betzina store and I bought 1 pack of needles because at the time, I didn't think it mattered. I thought all needles were the same. And this is the exact pack of needles that I bought back in the 90s when I was in college, and this is a size 60 needle, which is the smallest needle out there. Because at the time, I didn't know that needles came in different sizes and you had to get the right one for the weight of the fabric you were planning to sew. Which brings us to tip number 1. Always choose the appropriate size needle for the fabric you're planning to sew. Now, I sewed with this 60 needle pretty much everything. I sewed lightweight voiles, I sewed, cotton lawns, I sewed vinyl, and you know what happened when I sewed the vinyl? The needle broke. And let me tell you, it is no fun trying to dig the tip of a needle out of a sewing machine. So don't do that. Now, if you didn't know, needles come in sizes. And maybe you knew this and maybe you forgot, because sometimes I forget too. And it's really important to have the right size for whatever fabric you're sewing. Now, when I'm sewing lighter weight fabrics like lawn or chiffon or something that's very light and gauzy and airy, I want to use a smaller needle. So I want to use a 60, maybe a 70. 60, 65 is probably going to be the better size needle for that type of project because it's going to make smaller holes in the fabric. It's going to look better and it's going to help feed and through the fabric because it's not this big old thick needle jamming down in there. It's going to work better. Your seam's going to be flatter. Now, on the flip side, if you're using a thick, heavy fabric like a denim or a heavy wool, you want to go with a bigger, thicker needle. So at the other end of the spectrum, a 90 or 100 size needle is going to be a thicker needle that will hold up to even the toughest sewing projects. I think an 80 is a good kind of in the middle needle. If you want something a little bit smaller, you can go with a 70 or 75, but generally between 70 and 80 is a good sized needle for pretty much anything you're going to sew. Now you may be thinking, okay, Tony, that's great. You've been sewing forever and you know what kind of needle works with what kind of fabric, but how do I figure it out? Because I'm just getting back into sewing after years away. Or maybe you're saying, I just started sewing and I don't know what I'm doing. And since I've been there and not known what I'm doing, and I've also been there and just gotten back into sewing after being away for years, I'll give you some tips. First of all, you can get this book by Sandra Betzina. It is called Fabric Savvy. Now, the cool thing about this book is it tells you about all these different fabrics, but it also tells you what kind of needle size you need for it. So you might be able to find this at Half Price Books. That's where I got mine. I believe it's available on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description below. That is a great way to just double check that you're using the right size needle for whatever type of fabric. And it goes through and it has pretty much every kind of fabric you could possibly want in here. So it's a really great reference book. If you don't want to spend the money on a book or you can't find this book for some reason, just go with the simple principle that lighter weight fabric is a lower number. Needles go from 60 all the way up to 110. That's kind of what I've seen. There may be something a little bit smaller than a 60, but I don't have any in my stash, so I can't speak to that. The lighter the weight of the fabric, the smaller the needle you want. And then the heavier fabric, the higher the number. So 90 plus is going to be for thicker, say 65 and to 60 is going to be finer, and then kind of in the middle, you just kind of have to decide and test it out. So when you put a needle in, get a scrap of the fabric you're planning to sew with, and run a stitch line. And if the holes look too big and your thread's kind of loose, then you want to go down a needle size. That's kind of the best way to do it. And sometimes I'll do this. I'll think, okay, there's a 70 in my machine. This is a, lightweight cotton broadcloth fabric. And I'll sew a row of stitches and be like, oh no, that does not look good. Those holes are too big. And so then I'll size down with a smaller needle. And then now everything looks much nicer. My thread is nice and flat. My seam looks good. It's not puckering. And that's kind of the way to do it. When I realized that my sewing machine could sew with needles other than these expensive Bernina needles that I was told I had to use, I quickly switched over to Schmetz needles. These are the best needles around. Not only do they sew great, they also come in a variety of types of needles depending on your project. Which brings me to tip number 2, use the right type of needle for your sewing project and you will see exceptional results. Now, generally, you can just get a universal needle and use that. Universal needles are made to work with most types of fabric. They will work with any project that you have. And so if you're just sewing like regular lightweight fabrics or medium weight fabrics, so we're talking linen, we're talking lawn, we're talking, I don't know, what else do I have over here? I have a variety of cotton broadcloths. Any of those kind of basic fabrics, you can use a universal needle with. You can also use this with silk. Works just as well. Just go with a smaller, finer needle if that's what you want. So that's a basic, good needle. But because Schmetz is so awesome, they have all different types of needles for all kinds of projects. And I ordered a bunch of these back at Christmas because they were having like little needle bundles, and I got some really cool stuff. So first of all, they have costume packs. So if you are into cosplay or making costumes, or maybe you just want a variety of needles in kind of some general sizes to just have in your sewing arsenal, which is what I did. I got the 9 needle costume pack and the 10 needle costume pack. These have universal needles in size 70, 80, and 90, so that's great. They have stretch needles in 2 sizes, 75 and 90, and then they also have a jeans needle in a 90 and 100. So the beauty of this is that when you have one of these little needle packets, if you're sewing a variety of different things, you've got some options. This one also has a twin needle in the middle, so that would be for, say, top stitching some jeans, if that's what you're doing. And then the other 10 needle costume pack has, so it has a little bit different. It has universal, it has stretch, it has jeans. It also has a microtex needle, and it has a top stitching needle. So the thing about the top stitching needle is that the eye of the needle is wider and longer so that you can use a fancy thread for top stitching if you want, or just regular thread. It's going to let the thread feed through easier because it's got a bigger eye and it is also longer. So that is an added bonus of, using the right needle for whatever project you're doing. Now, when you order from Schmetz, and as mentioned, I ordered these back at Christmas, and so I have quite a variety right now. They send you this little pocket guide, or maybe this was part of the kit. I can't remember. I think I had a bunch of these, so I think this came with the order. You can go through and see all the different types of needles that they have. Now, not all of these are going to be available at a store near you, so my suggestion would be to get on their mailing list so you know when they're having sales, and, browse their collection to get some needles you need, because the last thing you want is to be in the middle of a project and realize that you do not have the right needle. This has happened to me. I was sewing with some very difficult metallic fabric. This was last August, so almost a year ago, making costumes, and the needle kept breaking. The needle kept gumming up, the thread kept breaking, and then the needle was breaking. And it was a total and complete nightmare. And so I got on the Schmetz website and I realized that there was a non-stick Teflon type needle. And so I ordered these. They're called Super Nonstick. I got them in a variety of sizes. So these go from 70 to 100. And I started working on them, and these types of needles are really fantastic when you're working with like sticky fabrics or fabrics that have adhesives on them, because the needle is going to feed better through that type of fabric. And while it will still gum up a little bit, it's nothing compared to a regular needle. So don't make the mistake I did. Have some of those in your arsenal if you make costumes or if you like to sew with metallic and kind of more difficult fabrics, because that will make a huge difference. Another needle that is fantastic for metallics is the Microtex needle, which comes in the costume pack. And that is going to be a finer tipped needle, so it's a little bit narrower on the end, it's a little bit finer, it's going to be super precise. The other cool thing is Schmetz has needles specifically for jersey knits and stretch fabrics. And I really wasn't clear on what the difference was between these, and I've been using them interchangeably. And then I read the little book and found out that jersey needles are for regular type knit fabric. So think two-way stretch. So you just stretch it. It's a knit because of the way it's woven. There isn't anything added to it to make it super stretchy. So if you have a cotton jersey or polyester jersey or a lyocell jersey, and it's just like a regular kind of stretch, you want to use a jersey needle. But if your fabric has spandex or lycra added to it or even elastic, that's when you want to go to a stretch needle. So think of it as if your fabric has a four-way stretch or even a diagonal stretch as well, you want to go with the stretch needle because that is going to be the better needle for that type of fabric. The good news is you could probably use a jersey needle. It's still a ballpoint needle. They're both a medium ballpoint, but you're going to probably have better results if you use the stretch needle. Now, I personally have not done this. I usually just sew everything with the jersey needle, so it's something I'm going to be trying very, very soon, probably with my next knit project. Prior to 2014, Schmetz needles looked like every other kind of sewing machine needle. They were silver topped. If you looked really closely, you could read the number of the size of the needle printed on there. It was easier back then because I could see a little bit better. And if you wanted to know what kind of needle it was, you'd have to use something like this old school little Singer tomato, which has the different sizes on it and also the different types of fabric. So you have lightweight woven, medium weight, heavyweight, denim and leather, ballpoint and knit, and ballpoint with heavy knit. So these don't exist anymore. I bought this in college, I used it for years, and now you can't find them. But you don't need them, because after 2014, Schmetz started color coding their needles. And if you get on their website, you can download or print out this super helpful little needle chart that will tell you what type of needle it is and what size, which makes it super, super helpful. Now, universal needles do not have anything at the very top, so they will only have one stripe on them, and that stripe will correspond with the specific color. So white would be a 65, light teal would be a 60, orange would be an 80, and then if it's a universal needle, it'll just have one stripe. Now, if you've got two stripes or more, it means it's something different. So stretch needles would be yellow at the top of the needle shaft, and then, if it's an 80, it would be yellow and orange. Or if it was a jersey knit, it would be kind of an orange, I think that's an orange color, yeah, orangey color. And then if it was also an 80, you'd have like a double orange stripe. So the good news is you do not have to figure it out anymore. You do not need one of these tomatoes. But if you still want something to help organize your needles, Schmetz also makes this super helpful little pad. It does not come in the frame. This is something I did on my own. I bought a picture frame, took the glass out, and put my little needle pad in there. I keep it on top of my fabric. You may have seen it in the background of some of my videos. It's just super helpful to keep things organized, and then I just put them back in there when I'm not using them. The downside is there are times listed on this helpful little pink tomato of how long you've been sewing, up to 8 to 12 hours, and it says purchase new ones. So here's the thing. I recently have found out that there is no set time for using needles, which brings us to point number 3. How do you know when it's time to change your needle? because needles are going to wear out like everything else. Now, some people sew a lot and sew like in marathon sewing sessions, and maybe you sit down and you sew for 4 hours and then you're like, I'm done, this needle's done, we're changing it out, it's all going to be good. I tend to sew in spurts, which is why I use this to put the needles in when I'm changing back and forth between projects. And I don't necessarily remember how long I've sewn with each particular needle, but I have a vague idea of how long it takes me to make each project. So I try and keep the same needle with the project, or use like a lightweight needle for this project, and then a medium weight needle for this project, and then a knit needle for my knit project, and then kind of just keep track of it, like how long have I been working on this dress? Probably a good time to change the needle. So you can do it that way, where you keep track of how long you've been using a needle, because you don't want to be like grandma. It was funny, the other day she called me and she goes, Tony, I think I need a new needle. And I was like, okay, grandma, well, when was the last time you changed your needle? And she said, I haven't. And I was like, what do you mean you haven't changed your needle? She goes, this is the needle that came with the machine. And I kind of cringed because I'm like, grandma, you know, you have to change your needle. And she goes, well, I just didn't think about it. So I went and changed grandma's needle, and suddenly and magically, everything she was sewing suddenly worked so much better, because now she had a fresh new needle to, sew nice stitches. Her thread stopped breaking and she had nice flat seams. So keep that in mind, that they don't last forever. And if you would look at a needle close up, they actually start getting like striations in them. The tip wears out. Sometimes they chip off, especially if you have the habit of sewing over pins occasionally. Although I have stopped that since I left college. I pulled the pins out. But just keep in mind that your needle needs to be changed regularly. How do you know your needle needs to be changed? Let's say you've been sewing with it, it seems fine, everything's good. When your thread starts feeding through your machine kind of funny, maybe it's breaking a lot, or maybe you're having like lumpy seam allowances, or maybe it's skipping stitches. Those are all indicators that you should change your needle. Other indicators are strange noises coming from your sewing machine. And this is one I didn't know that I recently learned. It starts with clicking, okay? Then it kind of starts with a kind of a grinding kind of noise, and then it gets really, really loud. So when your sewing machine starts giving you those little auditory hints, change your needle. I didn't know this. I was sewing along and I was like, why is my machine making that noise? Because it starts sounding really bad. Well, there's something wrong with the needle, and as it's feeding into the bobbin case, it's making noises. Mine was clicking, and I just decided to change my needle. I didn't realize it was actually a symptom of needing to change a needle at the time. Now I know, and I'm glad I did it, because if you don't listen to these changes and you think like, oh, there's something wrong with my machine, I'm going to have to take it in and get it serviced, that's what the technician's going to do when they first get your machine. They're going to look at your needle and be like, bad needle, let's change it, give me my $100. And I don't know about you, but I would like to save my money and service my machine only when absolutely necessary. I know it's supposed to be once a year, but I don't want to part with my machine that long. Just change your needle. It will solve most problems if you just change the needle. Now, I have a whole little jar of needles here. I keep this in this McCormick spice jar because it has like little stops at the top. And I was looking through these going, wow, I have some really wonky needles. And like sometimes the needle just gets a little bent. Maybe it was a little too thin for the fabric I was sewing with. Some of these are actually really like seriously bent. I know I was sewing a zipper and I didn't have it lined up quite right, and the needle like jammed in there and bent itself. Thankfully it didn't break, so I could manage to get it out of the machine, but that needle was done with. Sometimes things like that will be a sudden destruction of a needle, but for the most part, wear and tear is going to do it. Now, these are all tips that I have learned over the years, and I don't always remember to do this, which is why I'm sharing this advice today, because it's also a good reminder for myself, because the sounds of my machine, you get into like tune with your machine and you know when it starts sounding kind of funny. And when that happens, it's probably the needle. And if you pay more attention to your needle by choosing the right size, choosing the right type of needle for your fabric, and then keeping track of how long you've been using it, you are going to sew with extreme success. Your projects are going to look awesome. You're going to be so proud to wear them because the seams are going to be so flat and so straight. You're going to be super happy. And I know you're feeling inspired, so you totally want to check out this video coming up next, and I'll see you over there.